Hey everyone, and welcome to Time Extend, your racing game podcast. My name's Adam Ismail, and as always, today I'm here with...
Brendan Norrison, and today we'll be talking about the latest news topics in the world of racing games, and two featured topics this time around, as we'll be discussing a piece that Adam wrote recently, and also a new feature we'll get into later on in the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we've been gone for a while, but this is a pretty good show to come back with. There's a lot of news and a lot of stuff going on. I'm really excited for it. You pumped, Brendan?
Oh yeah, definitely. This is one of the weeks we've got a lot of exciting stuff to discuss, so we won't have to stretch out the introduction of a Hyundai to Forza or anything to make up time.
But what if I wanted to talk about Hyundai going to Forza? What if
You can if you want, Adam.
What if that's a thing I lived for? Never mind. I'm not going to complain about new cars in Forza. That's always a great thing. But we will move on straight into news because we have a lot to cover today. And we'll start with Team Sonic Racing, which was a bit of a surprise announcement last week as the Sonic Racing game that was teased months ago. I think it was in our second episode when we were talking about soundtracks that Sumo Digital was working on. Ended up being leaked basically in full, at least, we know about it. I think it was like an Amazon listing or something like that. The price of the game came out. We saw the box art, everything, pictures, and that kind of forced Sega's hand and was like, all right, well, I guess we have to announce a game now. So they announced it with a second teaser trailer that really didn't, highlight much about the game. It's just kind of like Sonic and Shadow in a pre-rendered trailer, if you will, just like kind of looking at each other and going like, let's race. So that's all we got to work with. But we know the game exists now, which is good.
Yeah, exactly. And the company that leaked it was Walmart, who actually this year have had a bit of a reputation for leaking things early. And it was interesting to see what the game was called, because as we talked about in an earlier podcast, they did use the R from Sonic R and made a big case to highlight that, but it turns out that, like we discussed, might have been the possibility that was just to generate a bit of hype. But in regards to Team Sonic Racing, the Walmart listing actually had some information about the game, which I'm sure Sega would have rather kept secret for now. But we do know now that this isn't part of the All-Stars brand, so we won't see Space Channel 5 and Super Monkey Ball and that type of thing appear here. It's going to be in the Sonic universe, with 15 playable characters, supposedly. So, I mean, how do you feel about that, Adam? Do you think that the Sonic universe has enough stronger characters to make this game work, or do you think Sumo Digital are so good in the gameplay element that it really doesn't matter that much?
I lean more towards the second one. I mean, I'm not going to complain about just Sonic characters. That's what we got from the first Sonic racing game for the most part. Yeah, I mean, Sumo's really good at what they do. So I have no concerns about this from a gameplay standpoint. I think they were kind of biding their time, thinking like, let's wait, a year, maybe a year and a half, just so everybody who was going to buy Mario Kart 8 has, so we can just we can just outlast that and kind of stand on our own. And I think the game totally will. We both love those Sonic kart racers that Sumo has worked on. They do fantastic work. The number of characters compared to previous games, it's going to bother Sega fans like us. I don't think in the grand scheme people are really going to care. And honestly, Transformed had so much Sega history in it that I wouldn't be surprised if down the line, to kind of revive the game, they came out with sort of like an All-Stars DLC.
That's a great point, because it's something that Nintendo deployed for Mario Kart 8, of course, by adding Animal Crossing and F-Zero, so that would make total sense. And I mean, I'll maybe give a bit of a hot take here, but I feel like some of All-Stars roster seem to be scraping the bottom of the barrel. Not even talking about Danica Patrick, but just
you're talking about Yogscast.
Yeah, exactly, Yogscast, and a Football Manager as well in the PC version of the game. Cool additions, but I think by the end of Transformed Lifecycle it was a perfect mess of Sega greatness, but a mess nonetheless.
Yeah, Sega doesn't... I'm sorry, I'm a huge Sega fan, obviously. The second half of our podcast is going to delve even further into that. But as much of a Sega fan as I am, they're not a company with Nintendo's history of storied characters. They just aren't. I mean, you could list 15, Nintendo characters, and you still probably won't be covering like half of all the company's famous brands and IP and whatnot. So Sega doesn't have that luxury. Once you get past Sonic and Yakuza, at this point it's you're in the football managers. You could go back in the past, you get like Alex Kidd, but nobody gives a shit about Alex Kidd. Like, I don't think Sega wants to admit that, but like nobody cares. Like, they may have been your mascot before Sonic, but nobody cares. The same thing goes for Opa Opa. The same thing goes for just about like Gilius Thunderhead. Like, it's not, nobody cares, Sega.
Yeah, I mean, there's games like Skies of Arcadia that are well loved, but do you really think people care about the characters that much? And I guess that was the problem Sumo faced. But one thing that I'm interested in, not to change focus from the characters, but because they've been able to be a bit more focused now, it seems from the feature list that we're going to get a game that is more focused in general, because the description specifically mentions the wisps from Sonic Colors acting as items in the game. And if there was one thing that seemed really random and transformed, it was the weapons list. It just seemed to be a hodgepodge of random graphics and types of weapons. So here it says there's going to be 14 spectacular offensive and defensive items to help overcome rival teams, which I'll get to in a minute, and get ahead. So it seems like they're really tapping into that Sonic Colors well, because arguably that was the best modern game, and it seems like the Wisps are a perfect fit for a kart racing game given the types of abilities they had in the main games.
Yeah, there's this problem that every kart racer that isn't Mario Kart has, where like they have to invent their own kind of lexicon of weapons, and people just have to know what they are. And that's not easy to do. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if you go back, I haven't played Crash Team Racing, for example, in like 20 years. But if you go back and play Crash Team Racing, I'm willing to bet it has a rocket. And I'm willing to bet that rocket acts completely differently from the rocket in Sonic Transformed. And there's no way, like, these companies don't have like 8 entries in their series like Mario Kart does, so you can't cultivate that kind of... People won't remember what each weapon does. Everyone knows what a green shell does, everyone knows what a red shell does. So that's kind of challenging for companies like Sumo to get over. But I think the Wisps might be a good way of getting around that, because it's something that's uniquely Sonic. Even though like I didn't play Sonic Colors, and I'm sure most people didn't play Sonic Colors, once you see that, you're going to know, okay, this isn't just, insert generic weapon-looking graphic here.
Yeah, exactly, and I'm all for making this game feel like its own thing, because I feel like if Sumo Digital want it to be a big success, it's going to have to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. And the introduction of weapons that actually relate to the Sonic series will excite the fans. And I just want to shift focus now to talk about the fact that it mentions teams, because I'm not sure if it's obvious from the title, but it seems like this will be a team-based kart racer, and given the way the industry's going, that shouldn't be too much of a surprise that Sumo are trying to incorporate some sort of team-based element here. And I don't know, Adam, is that something that excites you, or do you think this is almost a gimmick at this point, that everything needs to be team-based thanks to games like Overwatch and Rocket League?
Well, we definitely won't be talking about another team-based racer in about 10 minutes time. So
of course not.
So let's not even acknowledge that. Yeah, I don't know if it's really gonna make a difference or anyone's gonna care. Team-based racing is always an interesting thing, because to me it always seems like something that should be fun, or something that should like kind of cultivate like more of a multiplayer community. It never really does. I mean, even team racing modes and like Drive Club or whatever, for example, if you're on the same team, nobody gives a shit if like you're gonna you're not working together to block people. They're even if they're on your team, they're gonna take you out the same way they take out somebody who's on the other team, so it doesn't really matter. So maybe it'll work out, who knows.
I always find those team-based elements to be what I would call trailer fodder, where it's like it's shown in the trailer. Drive Club did it a lot. And it kind of gives the illusion that will actually happen, but we know in reality a 14-year-old kid in your team's probably just going to try and take everybody out anyway, including the people in his own team. And there were so many times in other team-based games where you'll come across dicks, because that's how it works. Like, unless you're playing with a dedicated group of friends, you're going to come across people who just want to be toxic. And I mean, I'm with you on this one. I don't think the team-based elements are going to be enough that we make a big deal out of them. But what I did notice was, in relation to the team-based element, that you can knock out opponents and unleash your team ultimate. So I'm assuming that means all-star abilities are out.
Yeah. In favor of team abilities, which are... I mean, who knows what form that might take.
Yeah. There'll be some form of meter management, I assume. Very similar to how it would work in a... Well, like in Overwatch. Sorry, that's always my reference point.
No,
it just seems
fine.
like everything's trying to piggyback off of the success of the hero-based shooter. So this could potentially be our first hero-based kart racer, which sounds very buzzwordy. Sumo can have that one for free if they want.
From your friends at Time Extend. Well, so this game is coming out on Switch, obviously, as well as PS4, Xbox One, correct?
Yes.
Okay. It'll be interesting to see what the discrepancy in the various versions will be there.
Yeah, from what I've heard, like most of the ports have transformed since it released on pretty much everything. Were actually pretty decent, so I'm confident that Sumo can put a good racer on the Switch, because I mean, I love Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. It's a great game, but it's still a port from last gen.
Yep.
Or whatever. I don't know how gens work with Nintendo anymore, to be honest.
They're on like a different universe, different timeline.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we've been blessed with V-Rally 4 as well this year.
Oh god.
So,
Yeah, you're right.
we've got two racers at least coming now of note, and I don't know, I've got a feeling we might see some more added to that list, but for now I'd say a new Sonic racing game is definitely something to get excited about.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm sure it'll be something that we're talking about probably by time of our next show, just because of E3 coming up, and I think we'll know more about the game then. I have a feeling they were probably saving it for E3, but this leak from Walmart just kind of forced Sega's hand, so here we are. But anyway, I guess that just about covers it for Sonic Team Racing and Team Sonic Racing, whatever. Everybody's Super Sonic Racing. We'll just move on to the next news item, which we're going to cover pretty quickly, actually, because we've got a lot to do today, and that's that GT Sport had an update. I'm not going to go through all of the cars in the update because I don't have the list in front of me, and really only 3 matter, and those are the Group C cars. You got the Jaguar XJR9, the Sauber C9, and the Nissan R92. And those are great fun to drive, and I was playing the update for a little bit earlier this week. And my only complaint is just that in typical Polyphony fashion, they kind of botched some obvious features, I guess. There's no night version of Circuit de la Sarthe, and also for some reason they put the Group C cars in Group 1, which is weird.
That is so strange.
Yeah, it's leading to a situation where basically on a track like the La Sarthe, which is, it's kind of cool, but it's also it's not, it doesn't feel realistic, or it doesn't feel like balanced racing. You end up with these Group C cars that are so fast in the straight line and absolutely terrible in the corners. I mean, they handle fine, but like they're no comparison to the modern like high downforce prototypes that we have now. So it's a really weird experience. I mean, the one thing I will say is that it bodes well for the future of GT Sports updates, simply because I don't think we really knew what we were going to get after March, and now that we have our first big update since, the last one with the M3 and Blue Moon Bay and so on in Tsukuba, I think it's good to see that Polyphony, this doesn't necessarily mark the end of GT Sports updates and extra content, and I wouldn't even mind paid DLC if it's worth it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can't expect free content all the time, so when March did elapse, it was a talking point, what's going to happen next, but it seems like Polyphony are going to continue on their way, and this update is pretty substantial. Like you're saying, the Group C cars are great. We even got an old Fiat 500 to relive the R-Racing Evolution nostalgia trip.
Yes, I'm sure just like in R-Racing Evolution, that car will be way faster than every other GT car in the game. Because,
definitely. Because
that's how it worked in R-Racing Evolution. So weird.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I mean, in regards to this update, I was disappointed to see that they randomly decided to add another Clio and another, the BRZ, despite the GT86 being in there. Because in a normal Gran Turismo game, that would be fine. But in a game that's still building up its content list, I would love to know why these two cars specifically got in over two other potential additions to the game.
Well, it's because when all you have to change is bumper.jpg, it's actually really easy to inflate your car count. I think it was just as simple as that. I think they just are trying to look to do it any way they can, and I'm sure that there are some like models and things and ideas and classes and whatnot that they're saving for their next big project, which hopefully we'll find out about E3, but I'm pretty sure we won't. I think we'll find out about whatever the next Gran Turismo is, maybe in its own event. You know, maybe I don't even know if we'll find out this year, but I feel like it's too early.
Yeah, definitely. I think at best we could hope for a Spec 2.0 trailer, maybe, during Sony's conference. Just an educated guess, really, on what they could show, because I think Sony have specifically said they'll be focusing on 4 main games during their show, but they're going to have some padding in there, and a Spec 2 trailer for GT Sport would really get people interested.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that too, like, you know, what if there was some decent, you know, real meaty sized update for GT Sport, like a Spec 2.0 or a Spec B or something like that. I mean, that'd be great. I wouldn't complain. You add in Deep Forest, which we know they're working on, a couple of cars and tracks and whatnot. Maybe throw some more old school stuff in for longtime fans. It could revitalize the game. Because we were talking about last time we were playing GT Sport that, like, as much as we want to keep playing this game and keep enjoying it, and even though it is like a very solid, like, well-rounded game, you know, it's just kind of getting old at this point. There's not a lot of content there, and we're kind of, you know, running on Steam right now. So it would really be good to see Polyphony try and prop it back up again with some substantial update.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll go on record as saying that I've all but dropped it at this point. I'm always open to online racing and that type of thing with friends, but yeah, I like what Polyphony's doing for those who are still engaged in the game, but I was always sceptical on the sport concept anyway before release, and to be honest, I've played it a lot more than I expected to, so credit to Polyphony for that, but unless this theorized Spec 2 update really ups the
this
game.
Thing that we just made up on this show right now is a real thing.
Exactly. It's a scoop for time extend, but
right.
If that was to exist and added weather and that type of thing, it would probably drag me back kicking and screaming, but it's hard to go back and get excited about driving a BRZ, put it that way. The Group C's are great, but like you said, the problem with those is the class they've been put in. But I guess that's something that could be remedied as well.
Yeah, we'll see. And before we go into further, you know, speculation land, should probably move on to the next topic. This show's going quick already. Jesus, 20 minutes in. All right, so what are we talking about next? We're talking about Onrush?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, so by the time this goes live, your Onrush review for GT Planet will go live, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right, so you're the man to talk about this game, because I've only played the beta for like 20 minutes.
Well, no problem, I'll just ramble on then. So, I'll preface the conversation by saying that I give Onrush a 4 out of 5 in the written review, which you'll be able to read on GT Planet. And yeah, for those who don't know, Onrush is the latest game from Codemasters, but more importantly from the now defunct Evolution Studios staff who joined Codemasters 2016, I think that was. And yeah, so Onrush is a team-based objective vehicular combat game. That's the description I'm going with. It's a mouthful, but I absolutely refuse to call it a racer. Not just because I feel it's deceiving to those like arcade racing games, but I also think it doesn't give Onrush enough credit for the complete spin that it's trying to deliver on the kind of vehicle-based arcade games. So I think it's the one thing I would say about Onrush right away is that it's a very fun game, especially if you've never experienced anything like it before, which 99% of people wouldn't have. And I almost feel like the beta gave the wrong impression because it was so straight to the point. You booted up the game, it would throw you in an event that you don't know what to do in it. You didn't know the vehicle kind of abilities and how the cars handle. And I mean, just as a brief side point, Adam, was that one of the reasons why maybe you didn't put enough time into the beta? Did you feel as if it was a bit presumptuous when you tried to play it for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, they give you that tutorial, but the tutorial really doesn't tell you about the special abilities with each class. It's basically, you know, press R2 to go and press X to boost or whatever it is you do in that game. It's very straightforward, and it would have been nice to have a little bit more hand-holding. I think for a game like this, you kind of need it because it's not your conventional arcade racer in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, exactly, and the good news is that the full game is actually really good with tutorials. Pretty much anytime you access something for the first time, there's a video, and it's an easy to understand kind of layout that shows you a kind of visual representation of what happens in a match, but in a very stylized fashion, almost CG. And then the voiceover, which is a bit cringy, but I won't dwell on that. Kind of
this
explains...
is Onrush.
Oh man, why don't you hit that, Bruce? But
yeah, oh man. Codemasters, you can hire us. Whatever lady with the sexy voice you had doing it before, you just get rid of her and hire Brendan. He's got it covered.
It's so Need for Speed Most Wanted. But
yeah,
anyway,
exactly.
Yeah, these videos are easy to understand, and every time you choose a car class for the first time as well, it introduces them. So there's all these elements that really worried me that they weren't in the beta, but they're there in the full game. And that kind of brings me on to one of the main points I'd like to make about the game. The presentation is really, really well done, and I'm happy to say that because I feel as if that's one of Evolution Studios' standpoint. And from the beta, which seemed really kind of chopped and put together, I'm so happy to see that the full release did a good job of making the game look a lot more fresh, and the menus look premium, which is important.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure about the budget for this game because the type of game it is, it could either be really cheap or really expensive because
there's no way to tell.
Yeah, exactly. There really isn't. It could go either way, and the reason for that is, yeah, there's no real like major physics engine at play, and you don't have to worry about that type of thing. But conversely, I'm flying down a snowy mountain in full weather, thunder, lightning conditions at 60 frames per second on the base PS4, and that is incredible. I would go as far to say there's some moments in this game when the dynamic time of day and weather kick in that it does look a lot like Drive Club in a weird way.
Wow.
You can see the influence from Evolution when they worked on that, but you wouldn't know that from the beta because they decided to make it in that, like, do you know in Drive Club there was that time of day that never looked good? It was like 4 PM or something like that.
Yeah.
And it always looked a bit too exposed, and you could see like slight jaggies and stuff.
Sure.
That's the way the beta looked. But when you play the main game, like there's a level where you've got like the northern lights in the background, and the sun's just setting, and you can see it leave a trail on the water, and then like
returning
snow
track
kicks
from
in.
Sega Rally Revo.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the presentation is really a step above what I was expecting at first, and it's all credit to the team for that. And if there's anything that will drag people in, it might actually end up being the visuals, because there's also a great photo mode in here that I'm sure people will create ridiculous photos with.
That's fantastic, because one of the things I was worried about when Evolution went to Codemasters is, you know, they created this amazing engine for Drive Club when they were a first-party Sony studio, and when you're no longer a first-party Sony studio, you have to kind of give up the tools you create, and you have to almost start from scratch, and that's kind of what they did here. And I feel like these days you tend to see a lot of third-party games that never really take advantage of the hardware because they have to work across so many different platforms, and maybe the studio doesn't have the time or the resources to really make this game look as good as it possibly could on, say, PS4 or Xbox One or whatever platform in particular. So it's great to see that Evolution's, you know, technical prowess hasn't been lost in their transition to being a third-party studio. And it's great to hear about the presentation as well, because, yeah, I wasn't very impressed with it from the beta. I don't think Evolution's ever really had, you know, I don't know, Drive Club, like, there was no doubting its status as, like, a AAA racing game. Graphically, you know, it's still, I feel like, one of the best-looking, best-playing games of this generation, and it's almost 4 years old. But something about, like, the menus, it always felt like they lavished all of their attention on the gameplay, which is great. I mean, they probably should, but every other aspect of the game felt kind of overlooked, and I don't know, just not very visually interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that Onrush tries to do, and like, I'll just preface it right now, it's obnoxious as hell. There will be people that don't like how far Onrush goes with its stylized approach, because There's like over 500 customizable items in here, which will make some people just turn off immediately because that's not what they're looking for. And a lot of them are kind of in your face style sass. And it's the same with the sound design as well. It's very aggressive and in your face, and if you like good sound design, then you'll probably fall in love with it. But there'll be a lot of people that, I mean, we had a joke on Twitter about this, but like the best way to describe it is the chemists are in there, so you know what to expect.
Yeah, it's like being transported into 2008 all over again.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as I'm concerned, because Onrush pulls it off so well, it isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it feels like a game out of time in the best possible way. I mean, I think I said when we had a conversation about it a previous day, Adam, but it feels almost like a mashup of Excite Truck and Shocks, which we've discussed briefly on this podcast before, and it doesn't try to pretend to be anything else. Like, there's not that Need for Speed edge of trying to come across as cool. It's almost campy cool. I think that's the best way of describing it.
Excite Truck and Shocks, it's almost like they made it for you, Brendan.
Yeah, exactly, and they managed to totally remove the racing, and I still enjoyed it. So, I mean, that is a good point, though, you just brought up there, because the main issue Onrush is going to face is, who is this for, who will buy it, and who will keep playing? And that puts in my head that we could see another Blur situation here. I hope I'm wrong, but it for as great as the game is, I'm just not sure how you sell it to someone, and that's something Codemasters has to work out.
Yeah, and if it doesn't catch on very quickly, which I'm sorry, but I'm almost certain it won't. That doesn't mean that it won't be ultimately successful in the end. But if it struggles, particularly out of the gate, I'm wondering if they'll come out with some form of either free to play or heavily discounted version. Because I guess the beauty of this game is you could kind of treat it like, Fortnite or Rocket League or Overwatch or any one of these number of like very popular multiplayer games now where the content isn't central to the experience. So if they maybe came out with a version of the game that had like, I don't know, 2 cars, and I guess they'd have to have all the tracks and all the modes, but whatever minimum amount that they needed to make the game cheaper or free, then they could do that and then do the rest through microtransactions. I mean, nobody likes that, but that's how these other games succeeded. So, I wouldn't mind Codemasters doing something like that just to make sure that this game gets the recognition and the support that it deserves down the line.
Yeah, and that is a good idea, because the general consensus on general gaming forums that I've seen seems to be like, wow, I'm not paying £50 for this type thing, because of games like Fortnite. I think they have taken the negative attitude towards those type of games and shifted it into a real place that gaming can inhabit now. There's nothing wrong with going down that route, I don't think, anymore. Because even with Rocket League now, you're starting to see more people ask, why is Rocket League still £20 plus microtransactions? People are wondering, can Rocket League go down the Fortnite route? And look, Fortnite is heavily the exception to the rule here. I mean, we're going to see like 25 Battle Royale clones at E3 at least.
Right. Nothing is going to saying do what Fortnite does or do what Overwatch does and you'll be as successful. Like, that's not true of a racing game. But at the same time, you want to look at those games for inspiration and for lessons, which, I mean, I think the whole focus behind the team racing thing is definitely exemplary of that. Evolution Codemasters saying, look, how can we take these gameplay styles that are proving really popular today and kind of use it to revitalize the arcade racer, which, as someone who loves arcade racing, albeit a very different form or type of arcade racing, at the end of the day, I don't want to be picky. I just want to see a genre succeed any way that it can.
Yeah, exactly. And if Onrush is the first step in developers, like, I'm not calling them out here, but like Milestone, for example, stepping out of their comfort zone and trying to give a bit more originality to the arcade driving genre, then fair enough. Onrush is a great way of doing that. And it's impossible to call if it can be a success, but I do feel like you said as well, it's easy to see why it might not be a success, especially when it's launching the week before E3. That is such a dangerous release window to take, because I mean, I know we might not see any direct competitors to Onrush next week, but all the gaming media is going to be focused in on this event. And what happens if a high budget off road racer comes out of nowhere? What if Nintendo announce Excite Truck 2 for the Switch? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's not going to happen.
And then what happens? Yeah, it won't happen exactly. But like the fact that I've went to that example shows that I don't think it would take much to push Onrush to the back of the queue in terms of people's thoughts about gaming, and that's what they need to watch for. I mean, according to the developers, there will be post-launch support. They've got an idea where they want to take that. They just have to make sure they transmit it well enough, because they might have a small dedicated community now, but that's even pre-release. What happens a month later if you lose some of that community and don't gain anybody else? And to see Onrush succeed, I think it needs to try and keep in people's eye as much as possible. And if that means constant updates and introducing new tracks and that type of thing, then they should definitely look at that avenue. And given Evolution's track records with Drive Club, they definitely have potential to keep Onrush fresh. Simultaneously, we know Codemasters aren't exactly renowned for supporting their games post-launch, so we've got an interesting scenario here where we've got one of the best examples in the industry and a company who prefers to kind of release on day one, and that's the majority of what you'll experience later down the line.
I have faith in Evolution to keep this going over the long term, but just to your point about E3, I think that the second people see real gameplay of V-Rally 4, they're going to forget not only all about Onrush, but every other game that might be announced at E3.
Yeah, there'll be riots outside the Los Angeles Conference Center. So give me that V-Rally 4, I need it, give me it.
I like the idea, and again, as I've said before, nothing against Milestone, nothing against the V-Rally, fine V-Rally 4 people, but I like the idea of V-Rally 4 kind of becoming our Dacia Sandero.
Yeah, definitely, and it's going to blow up in our face when it turns out to be a cracking game. But we're happy to take that chance.
Great news, everyone! V-Rally 4 has announced the Ford Focus. I don't know. It's my best James May.
Yeah, it was decent enough. But back to Onrush, just to give some closing comments, because I don't want to bore everybody with all the details, because the written review will be there.
Right.
But
go to GT Planet and read Brendan's review. Damn it.
Yeah, exactly. if you want all the information, it's already it's still a work in progress, and it's already about 2,500 words. So hopefully somebody reads it.
Yeah.
But closing comments, I think Onrush is fantastic for me. Like, I love it to bits, and even the single player is surprisingly in depth. I didn't mention it, but you can actually do the entirety of the solo campaign with up to 5 friends.
Which fantastic.
Is a really cool idea.
That's really cool, yeah.
And on a similar note, the party and multiplayer system's so fast, like ridiculously rapid, and it's something that Drive Club would have taken as lessons learned. Sorry, Drive Club, what am I talking about? Evolution Studios would have taken as lessons learned from Drive Club. And it just works so well. I've already invited like a friend into a party and joined a match within like 2 minutes tops. We're talking 40 seconds at the best of times. It's so fast and swift, and that's what they needed. But similarly to what you were saying about Drive Club's menus and stuff and options not being that in depth, it's the same with Onrush. For something so online focused, there literally is 2 playlists: quick play and competitive. So you're looking at a streamlined approach to keep the community together.
Yeah. But
long term, that might cause people to get a bit bored. So I'm interested to see if they do like seasonal events and that type of thing. I mean, can you imagine like for like 4 weeks to introduce an actual racing mode out of nowhere? That kind of thing might generate hype, and then people would wait for it to come back every time in like a rotated playlist. There's plenty of options to keep the multiplayer fresh, and if you're on the fence about Onrush, this is where it gets a bit tricky. I can't with full heart say just give it a go anyway, because it's quite an investment, especially for a game you might totally not enjoy and never touch. But what I would say is, if you've been waiting for something in the arcade driving or racing genre that like totally flips what we know on our heads, it isn't just a standard off-road racer with questionable physics. If you want something that actually tries to break the mold and you've got friends to play with as well, then I can't recommend Onrush enough. It's a streamlined honed experience that runs at 60 frames per second by default on the base PS4, with dynamic time of day and weather, and with the crazy gameplay. It's honestly a sight to behold. It's a pretty game, it's fun, and even if you struggle for those first few hours, if you do end up buying the game, persevere, because when it clicks, it really is I'll go out on a limb and say this, it's one of the best moments I've had in a driving game in the past 5 years, when I realised what I was doing and then being able to execute it, because we're so used to the idea of takedowns being the way Burnout does them, for example, where it's like those games' physics basically shaped how we crash other cars in other racing games. But Onrush takes a different approach, and it's so jarring at first, because you're like, why did I get taken out there? And then you learn, like, it's the slight angles, it's the heaviness of your vehicle. There's a lot at play in Onrush, and because it's so hectic, it can be easy to get lost in it. But if you end up picking up Onrush, persevere, because I've got no doubt that once it clicks, there is some fun to be had there.
Yeah, and it didn't really click with me during the beta, but I'm pretty sure with all the glowing things that you said about it, and also when we were talking about back when the beta came out, and neither of us were very convinced, given that you persevered and got through it, I'm going to try and do the same. And I think if you really love this genre and you really want to see these kinds of weird, chances be taken, then you're going to try and persevere through it too. And you ought to give it a chance, because I know Brendan, and he doesn't, make light of stuff like this. He knows a good thing when he sees it.
Yeah, exactly, and without it sounding
except
like
for
a
Excite
threat,
Truck.
Yeah. But like, without it sounding like a threat, to back up what you said, like, if you do want to see things like Blur reappear in the genre, then sometimes you've got to support stuff that you've got no idea you'll enjoy.
Absolutely.
And I understand that it's easy enough to say that, given, like, I've got a review copy of the game and stuff, and I can say that, and not everybody can afford to fork out full price at launch. But if you want to see more unique spins on the arcade racing genre, or the racing genre overall, then games like Onrush are, like, they're the diamond in the rough. They're the ones that will pave the way for the future of better and more unique arcade racing games.
Yep, and if you want to see the chemists in yet another racing game.
Exactly.
Anyway. Alright, so we're going to move on to our last, not really news topic of the week, because we're just going to have a brief discussion about the thing that I wrote, removing from what Brendan will have by the time this goes live, just published, and then something I wrote last week, which is mirror mode on Test Drive Unlimited on GT Planet, and you can go check that out. It's the first mirror mode in a while. It's something I always love doing, but it's just, I'm so busy these days that it's tough. But I was excited to do it for Test Drive Unlimited because, just I guess some background, if you don't know or you don't read GT Planet, mirror mode is a series where basically I play just an old racing game and just talk about, whatever it is. And there have been sims, there have been a lot of arcade games, because most old racing games are arcade games by today's standards. And Test Drive Unlimited was the most recent game in the series. That probably there's like 8 or 9 games in that series right now. The most recent game that I played for it. And I wanted to simply because I think it's a really important game. And I also think it's a really important game that you really can't appreciate anymore, because it was a very early online game. And, early online, like, practically, like, designed to be online, purpose-built online racing game that the servers have been taken down for. So that kind of puts it in an interesting place. And I just want to know, did you play Test Drive Unlimited, Brendan?
I did not actually. No, that's one of the skeletons in my wardrobe. I've never played it, despite all the great reputation it has. That's why reading your mirror mode was really interesting for me, because you described it in a way that made me feel as if I really missed out.
Yeah, that's something that Jordan, who runs GT Planet, I think the best praise he ever gave me was, like, you made me nostalgic about a game I've never played, which is really the whole idea behind Mirror Mode, is just to, like, for me to be as nostalgic as possible, or in the case of Sega GT, be as critical as possible, and make people feel whatever I'm feeling in that moment in time. So with Test Drive Unlimited, I think the main thing that draws me to it is it's one of the only open world racing games I can think of that really justified its open world. I don't think in the early days of open world racers, whether you go as far back as like Tokyo Extreme Racing or Tokyo Extreme Racer, or like even like Need for Speed Most Wanted or Midnight Club 2 or whatever, like those are all fine games, and in certain ways their world might be great or their world might be a little boring, or Most Wanted I think actually had a pretty good environment to kind of couch itself in. But I never get the feeling with those games that you do anything that you couldn't do in a closed circuit, that you do anything that like you couldn't just otherwise do if you just had a number of closed tracks in the game. And what I loved about Test Drive Unlimited was, in addition to the online aspect of it, they set this game in Hawaii, which is like, now you have Forza Horizon every like 2 or 3 years coming out, and it's in this like new exotic locale or whatever. But in 2006, setting a game in Hawaii where you had the entire island of Oahu, and it wasn't perfectly realistic. It wasn't like photorealistic. All the roads weren't in exactly the right place that they would be in, but you had this massive island that's still way larger than what you get in most racing games. I mean, it took you almost an hour to get from one side to the other, if you were driving not the fastest car in the game. And that kind of cultivates a sense of exploration and context that, like, just having a world of that size, it's like what a lot of people said, I think, of like Breath of the Wild when it came out, if you played that. It matters for racing games too, and in the case of Test Drive Unlimited, it made it really feel special. There were a lot of dead zones in that world, I'm not going to lie, but just knowing that like I could embark on this adventure from one side of the island to the other, who knows what interesting spot I might find, who knows what dealership I might run into, or what event might come up, or they have like these hitchhikers and models and shit on the side of the road that you have to like pick up and drive places. Those aren't very fun events, but like as you're driving across the island, you're encountering these things you didn't know about, and I don't know, for me it made it feel special.
It really does sound special as well, because let's be honest, there's so many open worlds and racing games that are forgettable and almost feel that they're there because that was the trend at the time. So if Test Drive Unlimited managed to turn that into something that was actually enjoyable at that time period nonetheless, then it's no mean feat.
Yeah, and the other thing that's important to remember about it too is that if you play Test Drive Unlimited, the way the game begins is you're basically like selecting your character from a number of, I think there's like 6 pre-made characters that you can choose from. Then you can go deeper into that and like modify the way their clothes are and their face looks and all that stuff. But you're choosing between these characters who are in line to board a plane to go to Hawaii. That is the extent of all of the story you get in this game, and I can't thank Eden enough for it, because like you pick your character, you see your plane take off, you land in Hawaii, you rent a car, which I think is hilarious this game is so, I mean, it's not super realistic, but certain things about it are oddly realistic in that when you land in Hawaii for the first time, you have to rent a car because you can't buy one, and you have like a 30-minute time limit on how long you can drive that car for so that you can get to a dealership and actually buy a car. Weird stuff like that really doesn't mean a whole lot, but like that's how this game begins. There's no story. There's no like, and this is something that like I go on and on about, maybe too long to belabor a point in the mirror mode, but just like how many racing games were like, back in the mid 2000s, the mid aughts, like, you're in this city, it's somewhere in California, they all look the same, you're with all, you meet all these people who are like your typical Fast and Furious archetypes, just these tired stereotypes over and over again. It's like tired stereotypes of like Latino characters and stuff like that, and they're all streetwise, and they all, they're all like, I got a friend who can run the garage. He'll hook you up with any car, any ride you want. And then you're in the race, and then they're talking to you over the radio, and everyone's like, "Oh, who's this guy? I've never heard of him before." But you take them all down, and then you take down number 1 on the blacklist. Like, we've all played so many of these games before. Open world games that have this story or some variation of the story, and I can't tell you how just freeing it is to be able to play a game that is open world, a racer of that type that doesn't bog itself down with any of that shit. It's just such a nice, clean, refreshing experience.
I mean, I was going to say that sounds like every mid to late 2000s game ever.
Yeah.
And then I realised that games still go to that well even today.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like,
The Crew.
It's just yeah, exactly. And it's one of these things where there's not much you can do with a racing game story wise, fair enough. But that should tell you like it isn't a big deal. So maybe not. Like even the last Need for Speed game, you're taking down the house. And it's themed like that because you're essentially in Las Vegas and you're stealing cars and all that type of thing. And it's like everybody got bored of that concept so long ago, but it seems like arcade racing game developers, especially when it's an open world, can't just maybe do something casual like Eden seems to have done here, where it's just like, oh, you're rich and you drive cars in Miami. I mean, you don't need much more context than that.
Yeah, that's the whole point. I mean, this game is literally like live the life. You're a playboy or playgirl or whatever the hell. You know, you have a lot of money and you can buy whatever you want and race whatever you want, and that's it. And that's all you need. And I'm not saying that racing games can't have stories. You know, in a weird way, like one of the reasons I love R4, Ridge Racer 4, is because it has this story that, like, I don't know, it almost, you can ignore it or pay attention to it. It really doesn't matter, but it kind of gives this context to the game. But it also, it's a different story than what you get in most games. I mean, it's older than any of the games we're talking about. I'm not against stories. I just want different stories to be told. And if a story's not worth telling, then maybe don't tell it. Like, that's my feeling on it. You know, if Rockstar made a new Midnight Club, right? And I love Midnight Club. And they feel the need to tell the exact same story as they did in Midnight Club LA, which is the exact same story that they told in Midnight Club 2. Maybe don't tell it. Maybe if you really need to put your game into a story, change it, do something different with it. Like, that's all I'm asking here. And Test Drive Unlimited was great because Eden was like, you know, hey, I mean, I don't know if it was a conscious decision. It might have just been the fact that the game was rushed and they didn't have time to work on stuff like that. If that's the case, then I'm kind of glad that it was rushed because, it just made the game a lot cleaner and a lot more streamlined.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you want to be able to experience that open world with as minimal barriers as possible, so it seems like Test Drive Unlimited did a great job of that.
Yeah, and the other thing too is this game worked right out of the gate. I mean, like, in terms of its online, this was online racer first and foremost, multiplayer racer where you could just kind of free roam. You just organically encounter, maybe there were 8 people in your lobby or something like that. It's a big island, obviously, so you might not drive into those people all the time, but yeah, you would just encounter these people and be able to just do like impromptu challenges, races with them, bet money, and everything worked out of the gate. This wasn't a drive club situation where people had to wait months, which I think really it really proved to people that the premise was a strong one and a solid one and one that made sense. And that said, though, it did have its issues, and some of the things I talk about in the mirror mode is just like, it does feel kind of janky in certain ways, and I'm not going to really knock Eden for that too much because this is a studio with, like, I'm sure their budget back then, you could have a racing game with a decently sized budget that was a third-party racing game, and it could have some decent production muscle behind it. But that said, I mean, this was Eden Games working for Atari, which was about to go bankrupt. So, I'm sure they didn't have a ton to work on. And from what I've read, it doesn't seem like some, very helpful commenters on GT Planet telling me that, like, the game was kind of rushed in its development. So I can definitely understand why everything didn't work out perfectly. But, like, just the physics are very strange. Everything feels just kind of stilted and stiff. Some cars are better than others. Like I would say, like, driving a Koenigsegg or something like that, you're going to have a much harder time. It's going to feel a lot less natural than, like, an Alpha GTV or something, which is the car that I started out with in the game. But and also, like, it doesn't. I'm trying to put myself back in 2006. Like, it wasn't a bad looking game, but and especially with everything that had to stream in the world that had to create, it wasn't a bad looking game, but you do run into a lot of issues where, like, the frame rate takes a big hit because you are, especially when you're in a really fast car, and you're in like you're in a high speed section of the island, or you're on a freeway or something like that. I mean, if you're driving, top speed in like a Koenigsegg or, what have you, you can actually outrun the system's ability to render the environment, which is like a really, I mean, it's not a good thing when it happens, because the game, like, you just keep going and there's no road underneath you. And this would happen, not every time I played the game, but a decent amount of times back in the day, and it was just, yeah, it's something that like would not fly today. And I think the only reason that like people might have been okay with it back then is because, again, this was so ambitious that you kind of take the good with the bad, like you do with a lot of, say, like Bethesda games, like Skyrim or Fallout. For what the game is trying to do, you kind of just accept that some things aren't going to work out well.
Funnily enough, that whole running the road and going faster than it seemed to be something around that time period that was pretty common, because I can't remember what game it is, but I'm pretty sure I've seen something like that before.
Yeah, and I'm sure it popped up in other games. And again, I'm willing to give Ian the benefit of the doubt, because I know what they were trying to do was pretty phenomenal. I mean, like, you don't encounter load times in this game. You do when you're like going into a shop or you're going into a garage or something like that, but that's it. I mean, you get a pretty decently long load when you start the game, but if you're just on the island driving for hours at a time, or for minutes or hours at a time, you're never going to have to stop. So when you consider that, it kind of makes sense why some of the limitations exist. And considering that we're running kind of long on this now, we still got another big segment. This is going to be probably our longest show ever, by the way. I think at this point it's pretty safe to say. I'll close it out with Test Drive Unlimited with, actually we know that there is another one in development, because even though Atari went bankrupt and Eden is now been fractured into, you have people still working under the Eden name making Gear Club Unlimited. You have, which is a name that denotes all sorts of things. You have people from Eden who then started Ivory Tower, which now does the crew for Ubisoft. This group splintered into a bunch of different companies, and they made a Test Drive Unlimited 2, but which I think a lot of people actually prefer, but I don't. We do know, however, that there is a third one, at least as of like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. There's a third one in development by Big Ben Interactive, which I guess snapped up the rights to this game, or whoever the publisher is. I don't know if it's Milestone or somebody snapped up the rights to Test Drive Unlimited. And I don't really know how a studio with an even smaller budget that makes kind of these like sort of homely middling racing games. I don't want to shit on anything they do. It's just like they're not very, they don't have that AAA shine to them. And I understand why, I mean, if you look at the games they produce, they're fine, they're perfectly serviceable, but I think something ambitious like Test Drive Unlimited, I don't know how that's going to shake out if you don't have all systems go, just like all of your weight, everything behind this game. Perhaps they do, perhaps they're able to find a little bit more in the coffer to do something like Test Drive Unlimited, but we'll see. I'm glad it's not dead, but it's a very strange time if you're a fan of the franchise.
Yeah, good way of summing it up.
All right, so with all that out of the way, we can get on to what we really showed up for, what this show's really all about, which we're going to leave for the next segment. All right, so this week on Time Extend, we're introducing a new segment, and it's going to, I guess, be a very self-indulgent segment because it exclusively deals with Sega and Sega racing games and Sega systems. But there's actually, this wasn't something we were playing for a long time. We weren't like, oh, we want to be a Sega podcast. This segment is all about Dreamcast racers, and it's called Sega Racing System. And we're going to talk about a different Sega, a different Dreamcast racing game when we do this segment every couple of weeks or what have you. And honestly, like, we weren't planning this. Like, the whole reason this started is just because Brendan bought a Dreamcast. That was it.
That is it.
That's the whole reason that we did this. This wasn't something that I was planning. Like, I just want to talk about the Dreamcast for hours on end every week. Like, no, this was just Brendan bought a Dreamcast, and then one thing led to another, and here we are. And if you follow him on Twitter, he's actually been giving away an accidental second copy of Tokyo Extreme Racer that he bought for himself. So, maybe get in on those sweepstakes because you'll save yourself like £2.
Yeah, exactly. That was one of the guiding reasons we decided to give it away, because by the time eBay would rake 70% of the £2.40 I would make, it seemed a bit pointless, and people love free stuff. Like, I'm genuinely surprised at the amount of people so far that's trying to win it.
I told you, like, just ship it to me, I'll pay for shipping, and you're like, you're absolutely insane. Like, why would you? It would cost so much. Why would you even bother? Because I don't have Tokyo Extreme Racer, but I have Tokyo Extreme Racer 2. So, but that's a discussion for another time, because we gotta get into the first game that you got for your Dreamcast, which is Sega Rally 2.
Oh yes,
yeah.
I'm really excited about this one. Never actually properly owned a Dreamcast myself, but I'd say Sega Rally 2 is probably the game I've played the most without never actually owning.
For a long time, that was Ridge Racer Type 4 for me. I rented it weeks in a row when I was a little kid, until I think my family spent more money on it than if we just bought it in the first place. Which I don't know why they really let that go on for as long as they did, but they did. So just to give a little bit of background behind Sega Rally 2, it's a second Sega Rally game. I bet you never saw that coming. Wow. It came out in in the arcades in the only date I have for this is the US in February of 1998. And this isn't going to concern much about the arcade game because, like I said, it's a focused discussion on Dreamcast racing games, but the arcade game is relevant to this one because of how much was changed or dropped or what have you. The Dreamcast version came out in January 99 in Japan, which is the Dreamcast, I believe, came out in December of 98. So this game was supposed to be a launch title and got pushed. Likewise, in a weird way, it also got pushed for the European and US launches, which were a year later. So it came out in Europe in October of 99 and in the US in November of 99. So with Sega Rally 2, the arcade game is pretty relevant to this because in the transition to the Dreamcast, it actually had a pretty troubled development. It was first shown off at Tokyo Game Show in 98, and initial reports there were that the game really wasn't looking good. The frame rate was terrible, and it was, I think, about 40% done at the time from what I read. It was being developed by Sega CS2, which was one of Sega's consumer software teams. And basically, they had this team working on the Dreamcast version, and concurrently they had another team working on the PC version. And as many people know, the Dreamcast supported Windows CE development libraries. So Sega basically, almost at like the 11th hour, decided the team that's working on the Dreamcast version isn't doing a good enough job. They're not going to get out in time. Let's move the PC team basically to a Dreamcast and have them develop both versions. So in a weird way, the Dreamcast version is actually a port of the Windows one,
wow.
kind of, which is why if you've played Sega Rally 2 on the Dreamcast, it's got a lot of problems. The frame rate is very inconsistent. The original Japanese release, which I played for this segment, I played the Japanese one, the US one, as well as the Model 3 original through the Supermodel emulator. The Japanese original it could run at 60 frames per second, but it didn't. Like, I don't really know why they left it uncapped, because this game hits the 60 frames threshold so infrequently. I mean, anytime any other car pops up on screen, any other system geometry, anything like that, like it just plummets. It goes to 30 or below. So for the US version and for the European version as well, I think they capped it at 30, but it won't even hit 30 all the time. So it's really a mess.
That is interesting that they decided to leave that uncapped, because even the PAL version of the game, for all intents and purposes, isn't a great port. I mean, there's still those kind of frame stuttering, and this is a game that only really has 2 cars on the screen at one time. Like, if we're going to be honest, that is generally how the gameplay loop works. You overtake one car, and later down the road you can see another. So for the frame rate to be as sketchy as it is pretty interesting, because, I mean, the first game on the Saturn, no less, pretty much ran incredibly well.
Yeah, no, the first game on the Saturn was a technical achievement. It had a frame rate that honestly never slowed, and that was on a system that really couldn't handle 3D well. And it wasn't an arcade perfect port by any stretch.
No.
But it still looked great. I mean, I would say it still probably looked better than any PlayStation racing game at that time. And they did on the Dreamcast, on the Saturn, which had its problems. So to go from that to Sega Rally 2, constantly running with slowdown issues, lots of pop-in. This port, and also the port of the Virtua Fighter 3 Team Battle, were basically the first Model 3 games on the Dreamcast that I would say, unfairly demonstrated the people of the Dreamcast couldn't handle Model 3, which wasn't true at all. I think, you look at games later down the line, like Ferrari F355, which I know ran on Naomi hardware, but that's like arcade, that's arcade perfect. And you look at games down the line on the Dreamcast that were pushing out everything you would expect from the Model 3. I think there's no question the Dreamcast could approximate Model 3 games, could do them well, but in the case of Sega Rally and Virtua Fighter, they were rushed. They constantly switched hands. From what I read, this Dreamcast version ended up launching that was based on the PC. That was done in like a month's time, to get that out the door. They were really working on all cylinders, and then after the Japanese release, it was just months and months, I think, of refinement, and they did what they could. There were certain cars, I think, that were added to the Western releases. In the West, we got the Peugeot 206. We also, I think they took out the Peugeot 106, which was in the Japanese one, but they gave us cars like the Fiat Seicento, which is just kind of a hilarious little addition. They had to take out the Ford Escort because the Escort, I guess their license with Sega ran out in the interim between the Japanese and American and the European release. But yeah, you get some extra content, some things taken away. The game doesn't run a whole lot better, but it's 30 frames capped at least, so at least it's not, it's not sludging down mid-corner and absolutely ruining your run. And with that said, I mean, I guess it's just time to go into, how we honestly feel about Sega Rally 2, and I know you have a lot of feelings about it, Brendan, so I'll just let you take it off from there.
So, I mean, when it comes to Sega Rally, I'm pretty much a mega fan. I genuinely believe the first game in the series is one of the best arcade racing games ever. And in terms of rally games, it really did pave the way for the likes of Colin McRae and that type of thing that would follow. Sega Rally 2, it's a bit more of an interesting take that I have on it, because when I played it in the arcades at first, I felt as if the handling was really light compared to the first game, and it felt a bit off because of that. It didn't seem as if there was any feedback coming back through the wheel in the arcade cabinet. I mean, I know we're not talking about the arcade cabinet, but that feeds into how I feel about the Dreamcast version as well, because there's no rumble here. I don't think the rumble pack is even compatible with the game, is it?
Oh, I don't know, because I actually
Yeah.
we had a Rumble Pack, but I haven't used it in probably since the Dreamcast was out. So
Yeah, but like
Rumble never interested me.
even forgetting that peripheral, like the cars feel so light that it's really hard to get a grasp to play the game with the analog stick at first.
Yeah.
But when I moved to the D-pad, like, this game has just blown me away, really. Like, I think Sega Rally 2 is a lot better than I initially gave it credit for. And I'm currently 7 golded championships down in the 10-year championship mode.
Wow,
And I just
impressive.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I just love how much they expanded the original Sega Rally concept into by adding all these cars and tracks. And that might seem like a small thing given what other racers around the time period were doing, but as someone, and you'll know this as well, Adam, who put in so many hours to the original game that only had like 4 tracks and one of them was hidden, it's
Yep.
really cool to see a Sega Rally game with pretty much the same handling, maybe a bit too refined, basically expanded into a full-fledged release. And that is why I think Sega Rally 2 has been the perfect first game to get on the Dreamcast, because there's just so many elements that make Sega Rally great, whether it's the corny soundtrack that just hits the sweet spot.
Love the soundtrack to this game.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
phenomenal. There's a wide range as well, which I like. It isn't just like the usual Sega Rally tunes with the keyboard and stuff, but you actually get some weird jazzy numbers almost in there. And
Oh yeah.
it's a great soundtrack.
The soundtrack actually, as far as you bring that up, it's not something I was expecting to talk about, but I'll go into this a little bit. So the soundtrack has a lot more songs than I think you would ever encounter on the Dreamcast version, because if you play the arcade version, which I've been doing lately, and it's been great because I never actually got to play Sega Rally 2 in the arcades when it was out. There are songs like, if you do the practice mode, for example, as opposed to championship mode. So like in championship, like you're on the snowy track, you get Searching for My Dreams.
Yeah.
You're on Riviera, you get like Go Go Sega Rally, the instrumental one, which are all great songs. In the practice mode, you get different songs. So in the practice mode, you get Estrada Nova, which is a song that you would only, if you played the Dreamcast game and never listened to the full soundtrack, you wouldn't even know a song exists on the snowy track, and that's where they use it, and it's fantastic. It's a great song. On Riviera, you get MNF ? Which is, I don't know what that title means, but it's actually it sounds like it has almost the exact same backing beat as Go Go Sega Rally, but it's a different song, and it's a phenomenal song, and also they definitely use a BC Boys sample in the song. There's a part where you can hear Ad Rock from the BC Boys going, "Yeah, boy," and it's definitely him. Like, I love the BC Boys. I know it's him, and it leads to this very interesting thing that I have to bring up for purposes of discussion, where a couple years ago, Hideki Naganuma, who is most famous for Jet Set Radio soundtrack, he actually worked on Sega Rally 2 as well. He was one of the guys working on Sega Rally 2. And, when I was like younger and stupider, I tweeted at him like, is that a BC Boys sample in MNF? Because he would answer anyone's questions.
Yeah.
And his response was just, "I didn't work on MNF," and I was so embarrassed. I was like, yeah. I mean, there were like 5 people on the soundtrack, so it doesn't necessarily mean you made every song. And I was just like, sorry.
Don't worry, everybody has those moments.
Yeah, but soundtrack's great. Even if you don't play a game, check it out. To bring it back to discussion about the game itself and the physics, yeah, I don't think Sega Rally 2 could ever live up to the original for me, and
No.
it's mostly because of the physics.
Yes. Yep.
They honestly, to me, feel like a step back. There's no feedback to a lot of these cars.
Exactly.
They all handle very differently. I'll give them that. They're definitely, like, if you drive a front-wheel drive car like the 306, I mean, you
God.
can't. Like, it just, you're not turning, you're not getting sideways. It's a terrible experience. But they all kind of do this thing where they kind of, like, it's almost a complaint I had with, like, the first Dirt, where, like, you can tell that, like, the axis that the car pivots around is in, like, the front wheels.
Yeah.
In the front end of the car, and the back of the car just, like, tails around that central point. The wheels don't have any, like, feeling of texture, connection to the road. When you begin a drift, you can literally do it just by turning the wheel sideways, no brake input, no throttle input, and you will slide at that radius until you decide to do something differently. You don't trail off. And for a game like the first Sega Rally, which you could tell, I mean, they must have labored over the suspension modeling of that game for forever. And it paid off exceptionally well because you could feel every wheel doing something differently, connecting with the road surface in a different way. I don't get that feeling at all from Sega Rally 2. And I think part of it, too, is a Dreamcast controller. As you're saying, the analog stick really is difficult to play this game with any sort of precision, and you need it for those later 10-year championship stages. To this day, I haven't finished all of them. I still have Year 7 and Year 10 I can't beat, which is a shame. But, yeah, I think if the Dreamcast controller was better, maybe if we were playing this with a PS2 controller or something, it would have been a big help, but at its core, this still isn't a game with a very precise handling model.
Yeah, exactly, and the sliding thing is such a good point, because funnily enough, I don't think this game's that far of a stretch away from Sega Rally Revo's handling. Like, they both have that weird slidiness to them that feels a disconnect from the road, and it is a step back from the original, because the best part about the original Sega Rally was how you could feel each different surface and react the car accordingly, but it almost feels like the Sega Rally 2, they refined it almost maybe a step too far, and as a result there's some great arcade gameplay in here because it's Sega Rally, but it does pale in compared to the original when you're talking about how the cars handle. But at the same time, there's a lot of track design in here I don't think would have worked in the original game's physics model, because that's one of the reasons why Year 7, just because you brought it up, is so hard, because there's a mountain circuit in that tier of the career mode. And it's just like, I believe it's like 4 S-bends in a row and then a hairpin, and it's in a really tight road in the darkest of night. With the amount of work you had to put into the original Sega Rally to get the car to do what you want, even just tackling that one hairpin at Mountain, you know what I'm talking about. That isn't there in Sega Rally 2. It's more concerned with how fast can you make it round this track once you get the fact that these cars will turn on a whim, and maybe that is to its discredit, but at the same time, because of the way they want the game to play, it also works in a strange way.
And you brought up the point that there are cars in this that you never want to drive. Like, we were talking about this a couple days ago. With, like, the 306 is one of them. A lot of these cars are just slow. Like, even if the handling might be on point, you're not going to win any championships with the Celica. Don't even try. I mean, I love the Celica. I want to love the Celica. I want to love the Celica in Sega Rally 1. But, like, I mean, the Celica in Sega Rally 1, if you wanted to win, you weren't going to drive that car anyway. But, like, I don't know, this was back at a time, I guess, when, like, balancing wasn't very important in games. So, I mean, they would put these cars in these games, and if you didn't want to drive them, if you wanted to drive them, then you were going to have to do it in, like, against your friends or whatever, or maybe in a time trial and see how fast you could go, because you're not going to win the championships with these cars. I mean, like, I had to use the Stratos or the 205 Turbo once I got that for every single pretty much championship that I won. And I think, Brendan, you're saying that you're not using the Stratos, which I find, like, I don't know why you would put yourself through that punishment. Because you need it. I feel like you need it to win some of these.
Well, the thing is, so far, of the 7 that I've golded, I've been able to do 6 of them with the Delta, which is a great car in the game, because it's basically just the Stratos, just slightly worse. And then for the 7th championship, and maybe this is the missing key to the puzzle for you to gold, but I actually used the Lancer Evo 3 of all things.
Okay.
And this brings me to one of the problems I have with the car roster and the fact that the balancing isn't there. In all honesty, in the original Sega Rally, if you did want to clear the arcade mode with every car, if you were determined to do it, you could get the Celica there, and you could get the Delta there, and also the Stratos with ease. But, like, in this game, like, I'm not kidding, once I realised I couldn't beat Year 7 with the Delta, I would do one corner with at least half the car roster and just go, this is pointless, and just stop playing. And it got to the point where my little brother was making fun of me for it. He's like, you just reset every single time something goes wrong. I'm like, no, it's not me, it's doing the wrong thing. It's just these cars are undrivable.
If you drove this Peugeot, you'd know it's definitely not me.
Yeah, even in the arcade version, that 306 was awful. I don't get it.
Yeah. It's so weird that they really went out of their way to like, we're gonna put more cars. I think so. In the arcade version, they had the 1997 season cars. Those are all the cars you see in the game, outside of obviously Celica and the Delta. And then the cars that they added, especially to like the US and European versions, are 98 models. So that's why you actually get another Evo in the Western versions. You get the Evo 6, I think, in addition to the Evo 5. But the thing is, like, they have so many cars in this game. It really is a great roster. I mean, you have stuff like the Alpine A110, the 037, the 131, the Barth. Like, these were cars that growing up, I had no idea. I didn't know existed, and like I wouldn't really know until I played Gran Turismo 4 to encounter many of them. And it was a really inspired roster. But most of these cars aren't worth driving, and that's the biggest shame of Sega Rally 2's car roster. It's like, it's a fantastically inspired one, but you're not going to want to drive most of these cars competitively because it's just not worth it.
Yeah, exactly, and the fact that the best de facto cars are the Delta and the Stratos shows the problem. They paid homage to those cars by including them, but they still shouldn't be the best choices in the roster that included the 1997 cars. And honestly, like, the idea of having the Impreza and the Evolution in the Sega Rally series was so cool to me when it first happened when I was a kid. But like,
absolutely,
they've just kind of ruined the way they handle so much that it's like, it doesn't suit Sega Rally's gameplay. If this was any other racing game, you would persevere because you could still get first. But this is a game that literally punishes you if you hit one wall. It's you've ran out of time.
Like, it's incredibly punishing.
Yeah,
like more in the first game.
Exactly, more in the first game for sure, but at least all three of the cars could be worked to a certain degree. There are cars in this roster you'd have to be mad to drive, and that is the truth and the sad part about Sega Rally 2.
And a lot of track design that's like very... I go back and forth about track design in Sega Rally 2, because I actually like the mountain stage a lot. And when I'm talking about these, I'm talking about like the core tracks in the arcade mode.
Yes, yep.
Sega Rally 2 has a ton of tracks in the championship mode and time attack and single player and whatnot that you'd encounter otherwise. It really has a pretty big track roster, because it's like 3 per environment, and there are like probably 6 environments. So that's a decent amount. But as far as the core arcade tracks are concerned, I like Mountain. And I guess that's it. Like, the desert track is like, I read that they really wanted to make it easier for beginners, and I mean it is. Like, it's super wide. There's nothing remarkable about it. I think the original desert course in Sega Rally 1, I think all of those tracks are amazing pieces of track design, but I think the first one is perfect because it just gives you the right amount of difficulty. You could get through that track pretty easily first time out, but you're going to be caught out by that jump in the back straight, and you're going to be caught out by that chicane. And those are things that, like, yes, they're difficult for beginners, but they also teach beginners, like, this is what you have to pay attention to. This is something you're going to want to take over and over and over again just to get right. And I think you need that. The first desert course, or the desert course in Sega Rally 2 doesn't have any of that. Mountain's okay, but it's also kind of repetitive. Snowy is very repetitive.
Oh, yeah.
And although the thing I'll say about the snow course in this game is that, at least because it's a snow course, they introduce, like, snowbanks, which completely, that just like in actual rallying, like, it does affect the car differently. There's something you want to stay away from, but it is kind of like a soft wall. So it's like a different interaction with those edges of the course. And then Riviera is just half of the Monaco track. It's just kind of boring. But yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about track design in this game?
It is very hit and miss. The desert track is pretty much Babby's first desert from Sega Rally 1. I mean, they managed to get around they managed to get around the the very plain track design by basically saying that if you can't clear this fast enough, you won't beat Mountain. But I think that's part of the problem, that Sega Rally 2 almost feels obsessed with the timer. Because in the first game, you could immediately go, I lost time because of this, I hit this wall, I didn't hit this corner right. But in Sega Rally 2's arcade mode, it almost feels like it's really hard to identify where you're supposed to make up time because of the track design. There's a lot of, in the first course, for example, you're basically supposed to just drive in a straight line where possible. There's a lot of turns that have those like banks on either side that you can just go right through.
Yep.
And then Mountain, like we've talked about, is probably the best well-rounded circuit, but nowhere near as good as the original. And like the annoying part about Snowy is that I'm not sure what they were going for, because I mean maybe I just suck, right? But you don't overtake anyone on that track, if I remember correctly.
No, it's weird in the championship. Yeah. I think you can maybe overtake one person, and I played all these versions of the game ad infinitum or whatever this week, and yeah, I couldn't. You don't carry anyone on Snowy. It's pretty much just a lost stage, and I don't actually hate it because there's this one. Especially if you watch the replays, there's this one corner that's like a very open hairpin. That's a lot of fun to take. In the right car, that can be a thrill. But most of the track is just middling, and you kind of forget about it. And then Riviera, I think Riviera is such a missed opportunity. That might actually be my least favorite track, simply because it's just so boring. Like, it's just, the same corner kind of 4 times. You got a hairpin on both ends, and I know there are slight variations in that, and I know there were, clearly you look at it, it's like this is the second half of the F1 Monaco Monaco Grand Prix course. But yeah, there's just nothing to it really. It's just, I remember being hyped for it when I was a kid. I remember like, oh, this is the night track, it's in the city, it's cool. But now when you go back to it and you just kind of look around, you're like, even graphically, there's not a lot to this track. It's really funny because you can, in the Japanese version, actually in the American version you can do this too, but you can put in a code on the title screen to get rid of extra details and stuff to make the game easier to model. Right. Yeah, so if you do that, it actually might hit it 60 frames per second more often. There's still no guarantee, but it definitely, like, you can put in this code and the game will be a little smoother, for sure. And it's funny because on Riviera, it's like it runs better, but you don't really know why, because they don't get rid of anything, because there's nothing there. Like, the only thing they get rid of are the trees and the lampposts. Those are all like sprites, there's nothing to that geometry, and yet they get rid of it and it makes the game run better. It doesn't even make sense.
Riviera really annoyed me because, like, one of the best parts about Sega Rally is its original track design. And that seemed like such a cop-out. Yeah, it's cool, you've got like a fake Monaco there, but compare that track to Lakeside in the original. There is no comparison there. And that is the annoying thing. The track design in Sega Rally 2, in my opinion, it tried to replicate super special stages in the WRC rather than the actual core challenge of rallying that Sega Rally 1 captured so well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And the one thing I wanted to touch on, because we're going to close this out soon, is that having played the Model 3 version, I highly recommend, I can't tell you where to get ROMs because I don't want to be arrested, but I highly recommend you find a way to play Sega Rally 2 with the Supermodel emulator, because, and by the way, like, if you don't know Supermodel, it's a Model 3 emulator that will honestly run on most PCs now. I have it running on the new MacBook Pro. It runs perfectly fine. And if you go into the Supermodel forums, they have more recent versions of the emulator that play the game even better. Like, don't get the one that's on like the Supermodel homepage because it's actually quite outdated. If you get a more recent version, Sega Rally 2 runs really well, and it's the preferred way to experience this game. And I would also say that, like, I'm using a PS4 controller. I'm using a DualShock 4. And the added precision of the DualShock 4 analog sticks makes the arcade version, emulated even, so much easier to play than the Dreamcast version, by far. Because you have that better controller, the extra precision. It's really night and day. Also, you have a locked frame rate. That really helps. So, in a weird way, Gonna go out on a limb here and say that the best way to play this game is the illegal one, and maybe you should think about it. That's all I'm gonna say.
Well, you could do that or buy a cabinet for £2,000. It's your choice.
Oh right, I mean just do that. Like just obviously follow the law and just do that.
Yeah, so I would like to say that although I've been critical of the game for this discussion, because that's why we have these discussions and will have them in future podcasts.
Right.
There's still something about Sega Rally 2 that makes me love it, because, I mean, for 3 days straight, I was trying to gold to Year 7, which is like 4 tracks. I don't think I would do that with any other game. Persevere so much and try so hard to get a gold. So the core gameplay loop's still there. It's just that if you go from the original Sega Rally to 2, it's a more simplified game with more expansive content, and I think that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah, no, that's the best way to describe it. There's less depth here, but there's more noise, and some of the noise is good noise. Some of it's like a really cool car roster, and when you get into 10-year championship mode, you get tracks that aren't fantastic, but very interesting. Like I think there's this one mountain track. It's just like the road gets so wide. There's so many bumps, and it's just you're launching your car into the air, and it's absurd. But yeah, there's a lot of weird things to discover about the Dreamcast version. Even though the gameplay, even though the physics aren't quite there, there's something that keeps making me return to this game among a lot of Dreamcast racers, and I think that's something special. But the one thing that I want to talk about, and Brendan, I've teased this to you for like a week at this point.
Yeah.
Is this crazy discovery I made about Sega Rally 2. I'm about to blow your all minds, so yeah, get ready for that. So in doing research for this, I ended up on Sega Retro, which is a fantastic resource for anyone who cares about old Sega stuff. And as I'm on Sega Retro, I'm scrolling down, and I see that there is they have a bunch of print ads for the game. And I see the one print ad, which was the for the Spanish version of the game, reads as follows. Goes, Trata de Arancarlo, Carlos por Dios, Trata de Arancarlo. And there are pictures of a Castrol Toyota Corolla on the screen, which was Toyota's WRC car at the time.
Yeah.
Does anything seem fishy about this to you, Brendan?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Are you well versed in your WRC history? Are you a rallying fan? Like real rallying.
Not enough to notice what the issue might be.
Okay. Because here's what I saw. I saw the word Carlos, and I saw a Corolla. Now, for those of you who are racing fans, you're no doubt thinking what I am, which is Carlos Sainz, one of the most, one of the best rally drivers of the last couple decades. And he won 2 championships. But the interesting thing is, he got really, really close in, I think it was 97 or let's say 90. I think it was 98. So in 1998, it's the last rally of the year is in Great Britain, and It's pretty much a shootout between Tommy Mäkinen and Carlos Sainz. Tommy Mäkinen has a very early retirement on date 1. So at this point, Carlos Sainz only needs to finish 4th to win the rally. That's it. So the entire weekend long, he's going, oh, we got this in the bag. They're asking him, how hard are you driving? He's like, I'm driving like 20%, honestly, sometimes. Like, I'm just trying to get the thing home. I don't care. It's like, they ask him at one point, they're like, you're like a boy waiting for Christmas morning. It's like, this is such a sure thing. And he's like, absolutely, we got it. 300 yards before the end of the last stage, his engine breaks down. His engine breaks down. You see the car crawl to a stop. Him and his co-driver Luis Moya get out of the car, and the words you hear are, Trata de Arancarlo, Carlos por Dios, Trata de Arancarlo. So they put the last final death knell dying cry of Carlos Sainz, and these words are from his co-driver in the Sega Rally print ad. And what that means is, start the engine, Carlos. For the love of God, start the engine.
That's amazing.
My mind was blown when I read this. I could not believe it. And like this was like a Spanish like day of mourning when this happened. Like I think people just didn't go to work or school for a week when Carlos Sainz lost the 1998 championship. And it's so amazing to me. It's such a great play by Sega's European arm, their Spanish division, to do this, the marketing department. And what I love too about it is like, you know, they put this in here because they couldn't put the next words out of Luis Moya's mouth.
I bet.
Piece of fucking shit.
That's incredible. That is some good stuff.
My mind was blown, man. I think that's the best thing I've ever contributed to Time Extend, and I'm not sure I'll ever equal it.
Oh man, that's great.
So that's where we leave you with on Sega Rally 2, and so glad we had this discussion. And there are lots of Sega racing, Dreamcast racing games, not all made by Sega. There are a lot of Dreamcast racing games to talk about in the future that we will be exploring through this segment, for sure.
Definitely. So as one last thing then, would you recommend Sega Rally 2 to people who own a Dreamcast?
I would. If you have a dream, I mean, let's be honest. If you're listening to this podcast, you have a Dreamcast, you have Sega Rally 2. But if you, if by some stretch you don't, or if you're thinking about buying a Dreamcast, definitely make this one of the first games you buy. It has a lot of problems, and maybe this is just nostalgia talking, it's got a lot of problems, so it keeps you coming back. I don't know.
Exactly.
It still feels, you know what? In spite of everything, it still feels like Sega Rally. And that's really the best thing I can say about it. So,
yeah, exactly. That's as much credit as you can give, and I totally back it up. It's even worth buying just to see the surprisingly decent weather effects running as well on some of the 10-year championship tracks.
And if you can, go out of your way to try and figure out a way to play the arcade one, because the differences kind of make it a little bit interesting. You might actually have a better time. So. But that just about does it for the longest running Time Extend. Actually, it might not be. We only went an hour and a half on this one. Damn. It's for another big Time Extend for sure. I've been Adam Ismail. You can find my work on GT Planet, as you can find Brendan's, and we've published stuff there in the last couple weeks, so definitely check it out.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Brendwings if you want to enter the sweepstake to win the copy of Tokyo Highway Racer, as it was known in Europe. Highway Challenge, sorry, I always get mixed up. We've called that game two wrong names so far.
It doesn't matter. I don't know why they had to change it. It's like, what, only Americans are stupid enough to be given Extreme with an X in the beginning of it, not an E? Like, why?
Zero was called Extreme over here, which is weird. It's only this game and then the sequel on Dreamcast. They changed it to the normal name on PS2.
Yeah, well, that series actually goes back even before like the Dreamcast, and it's like went on forever and has a bunch of different names. But the Tokyo Extreme podcast will come later.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Pioneer Spine. I forgot to mention that point, but yeah. So thanks so much for listening this week. Had a lot of fun doing this show, and we'll see you again soon.
See you soon, guys. Cheers.